Also, I mean, inevitably, if we end up in this minority government scenario, we know there's legislated cuts 43% to 1% of the world's problems. However, many of the Teals, community independents, they have said that they want 75%. The Greens suggest 75% and above much sooner than those things. How important is it to you that, again, there are going to be lots of people that are going to say, I'm not going to go team red, team blue, but the people who are thinking outside of those two things, that your preferences matter because there are consequences to it with things like that?
But, Paul, preferences will matter at this election more than any recent election. Let's be clear about it. The rise of independence, even in our own electorate here, we've got somebody who is a Green pretending to be a community representative funded by a billionaire out of Sydney and not being honest with the electorate about where the money's coming from. But the reality is that the Teals, let's say Monique Ryan in Victoria, or Zoe Daniel in Victoria, or Kate Chaney in Western Australia, these people have voted with the Greens on 70+% of the occasions where they had to vote in the Parliament. And it's this complete and utter sort of fraud in terms of they on the one hand say that they're all about integrity and honesty and openness, but the reality is that they would only support a Labor government. And that much should be clear to voters when people turn up, because if you're voting for a Teal or if you're voting for a community independent, that vote ultimately is going to end up with either the Liberal Party or the Labor Party in most circumstances. And in that circumstance, you have to put Labor last if you're not putting the Liberal Party first. And I think the reality for a lot of people is that we don't like either party. Let's just vote for somebody who seems innocuous, somebody who says that they're a disaffected Liberal in the case of some of the Teals. But the reality is that their agenda is a really hardcore Green left agenda. And the Prime Minister can only form a government after the next election in concert, in collaboration, in partnership with Adam Bandt from the Greens and with the Green Teals. And that, to me, is going to be a recipe for higher spending, which will mean higher inflation, which will mean higher interest rates again, and a lot of debt that we just can't afford as a country.
Well, and just to that extension, right, I was noticing today in one of the press conferences, the old question comes up about, Prime Minister, are you Greens preferences? Well, of course, the National Executive of the Labor Party are the ones who decide that, and guess who happens to have the casting vote on the National Executive? But he was trying to make it seem like it's other people somewhere else that make a decision. Where does the LNP, the Liberal Party, the National Party, all the versions of what it will take to build your coalition, where are the Greens going?
Well, let's have a think about the Greens and should we, as a party, support the Greens or preference the Greens? Well, the Greens believe in defunding the Australian Defence Force. They believe in the criminalisation of hardcore drugs. They have a radical agenda otherwise, which is about everything but the environment. So, no, they will go last for us. And that's the principled stance that we've taken. Now, the Labor Party can't survive without the Greens' preferences. And that's why the Prime Minister, who has used his casting vote on the federal executive to appoint candidates in multiple seats overriding the wishes of the local Labor Party branch members,
correct,
he's exerted that power, exercised that power in that circumstance. And so this whole, I don't know anything about the preferences, that's for somebody else to do. The Prime Minister, as each of his predecessors has done, will take the preferences, will give the Greens preferences ahead of us. And I think Australians see that it's a giant con job because the Greens and the Labor Party are joined at the hip. And the left of the Labor Party now, run by Tanya Plibersek and others, Chris Bowen and others, I mean, you see the results already. And Tanya Plibersek has tried to close down the salmon industry in Tasmania, tried to stop gas exploration in Western Australia, has tried to stop the agricultural industry in Western Australia, all because she's trying to please a Green voter in inner city Sydney and Melbourne. Why has the government taken an anti-Semitic stance and abandoned the Jewish community in the last period over this last couple of years? Well, because they're worried about Greens in inner city Sydney and Melbourne. And I think it's been one of the most shameful demonstrations by the Labor Party in relation to each of those issues, the environment, the anti-Semitism and a number of other issues. And I think the Prime Minister has been caught out in that regard.